Hello, my dears. Over the health. There was an ancient, crumbling waterhouse where the entire estate's water system was managed. Believe me, we thought it was a miracle how anything that old and manky could keep and pump out any water. But it did. It was made with bricks, with a black slate roof and iron doors, although at the time of this incident, it was just a shadow of its former self, and didn't have any doors. The windows were all smashed in by generations of kids throwing rocks and stones at them. It was there where my mama and her siblings were kids played over the heath, and they all told us it. Spooked them and their mates as it did us. It was a really hot day one summer in the school holidays. The older boys were at home for some reason, and all the younger cousins, me included, were being little brats, so the boys said they would take us all blackberry picking to keep us quiet. Mama agreed gratefully. The boys were really responsible and mature, at 16, 17, and 18. They babysat for us younger kids all the time, so we all knew the rules of staying close to the boys and doing what they told us. And so, a half hour later, everyone had their fruit buckets, and we were off. There were 5 of us younger kids. We were all really excited, as blackberry picking was a great family favorite activity, and our Gran's blackberry pies were the best. Gran's house led directly onto the back of the heath. There was a fence with a gap at the end. One of my older cousins passed me through to the other, then lifted my tiny wheelchair over the fence. The other kids were through in seconds, and we were away again. On our way to our destination, the older boys told us spooky stories, as they always did, half because they liked scaring us, and a half because we all used to beg them to. There was nothing more terrifying than a story from my cousins, H or B. They were masters, and so believable. We loved it. We all stopped talking when we came to the waterhouse. Nobody ever dared to speak around or near the waterhouse, not even the older boys. For something so mundane, it always looked, and still does, so eerie. There was a second fence to get through before we reached our beloved blackberry field, but this time as we squeezed through the gap of the fence, we were all more somber as we remembered the old wife's tale urban legend that we all knew about the waterhouse. Once in the early 1960s, there was a gang of bank robbers. They were local to the area and were really nasty pieces of work. Their expertise was terrorizing bank customers and staff alike before grabbing and shooting anything that moved. They did several jobs without getting caught, but they really messed up a particular job, and a sweet 19-year-old trainee bank clerk was shot dead, and 5 more people were seriously injured. One of the gang was also shot dead, along with the nastiest member of the gang being seriously wounded in the crossfire. It is said that the remaining gang members escaped with just a few hundred and made their way over to the heath and hid out in the waterhouse. It was newish at that time and was a perfect hideaway for the murderers. There was a lot of contention and stress between the remaining gang. Months, although it was never proven how. The bodies of all 3 of the remaining gang members were discovered rotting away in the waterhouse 6 months later. A few years after the weird stuff and creepy noises started occurring near and around the waterhouse, mysterious, hairy figures were glimpsed moving stealthily amongst the pipes and wires. A dank, moldy, rotten smell like aging river weeds was always smelt around the area of the waterhouse, and eerie wails and menacing murmurs could be heard day and night. In the late 70s, there was a spate of mysterious deaths of homeless people who would shelter over the heath not too far from the waterhouse. There was nothing to ever link the deaths to the waterhouse, but the locals soon started giving the waterhouse and surrounding area a wide berth because of the creepy history and dark reputation, and that left the waterhouse abandoned and in disrepair. That's what we knew of the waterhouse's dark history. That is why we were so wary and anxious to get away from it as quickly as possible. When we were all through the gap in the fence further away from the waterhouse, us younger cousins built up enough courage to glance over at the building of ill repute before being rounded up by the older boys. A put me in my wheelchair again, and we set off to the blackberry field. We soon arrived at the field where some other local kids we knew were already there, and we spent a nice afternoon picking and eating the juicy, sweet blackberries and splashing in the river. And soon the sun was getting low, and it was time for home. Our journey home was much like the one there. We were still bantering, laughing, and the older boys were still winding us up slightly. But being as it was getting later, we were feeling wearier and slightly subdued. When we reached the fence before the water house, the air felt slightly too close, like before a thunderstorm. The youngest of the three older boys got me out of my wheelchair so that B could lift it over the fence. The other kids were already on the other side of the fence with H and B. I suddenly said to his brother in a low, guarded voice, "Something moved at the back of there, bruv." B just looked at him sideways. Out of the boys, A was the most likely one to pull a stunt or wind anyone up for a laugh. But A was straight-faced. A said, "I'm going to have a look," passing me through to B and squeezing past us all. "Wait up, A. We've got to..." Having put me in my wheelchair, B had moved forward towards his brother when we all heard A shriek out in horror and disgust, and the two boys moved back quickly. H, having already taken me out of my wheelchair again, had told everyone to run, and we did, B picking up my tiny wheelchair, folding it up while running, A grabbing the other two kids' hands and following B and H running with me on his shoulders, holding my other cousin's hands. We ran and ran. A kept saying, "Don't look back, don't look back." I did, but saw nothing. We didn't stop till we got to the fence which leads back to the road on the estate, and we could actually see civilization again. We were all completely exhausted, especially the older boys. Before we slipped through the fence to the road, B, holding himself up by the railings, asked, "What did you see, eh? Yellow eyes, H, hairy face." All of us younger kids began to panic and scream, and H had to calm us all down. He said that we were safe and it would be all right, but we all wanted to get as far away from the water house as possible. When we got home, we all looked bedraggled and slightly nervy. Mama and my auntie noticed this and asked the boys what was wrong. H just said that we just got spooked by an old drunk man in the bushes looking for golf balls to sell, and as that was quite commonplace over the heath, Mama and my auntie just gave us kids a pep talk and hugged us. We never did tell my mama or my auntie the truth about the yellow eyes and hairy face, or find out what it actually was, but us kids didn't go near the water house for a long time after. Being a nurse is not easy. Being a triage nurse is even harder. Hi, there's no real reason for you to know my name, but maybe it will make me feel less alone to know I'm being heard, and that people are reading my story with a name attached to it. All of this story is true. I won't embellish or try to make it scarier. Sometimes real life is scarier than fiction, I think. Don't you? Before I get into this story, let me explain what my job is. I work as a nurse for emergency situations. If someone comes in by ambulance, I'm the nurse there. Let's just say, if it's an emergency, life or death, real emergency, I'm the nurse there. This story takes place on a very quiet, early evening, no dark and stormy cliches. It was actually a beautiful day in the Midwest. Humid, a beautiful sunset just beginning to descend, and I was feeling unusually afraid. I've seen it all. That's no exaggeration. Gore and blood and suffering sadly doesn't faze me. If you worked as long as I have in this profession, it wouldn't faze you either. Why was I afraid? Who knows? Maybe it was the fourth cup of black coffee I had just downed. Maybe it was the stillness. It was a very slow night. I roamed the hallways, looking at the cold hospital beds that were previously occupied by human beings in the last 5 hours, now stripped off and wiped down. The last people who had laid on them downstairs with a toe tag on. Just a number. Just a cold body. How could it be that I had just been talking to them? I guess it did affect me more than I let on. As I pondered, I heard a familiar sound. The automatic doors swishing open, the wheels against cold tile. Show time. I rush into the room, the new incredibly young doctor to the right of me, and now on the hospital bed, a woman who must be around 80 years old. I searched her with my eyes, taking in the delicate skin, the floral nightgown, the perfectly curled white hair, just like my grandma. I immediately felt a softness towards her, but also a feeling that I can't quite explain still to this day. The only word I can think of is dread. Heart attack. Very common. I'll never forget her looking into my eyes as we tried to save her. Hundreds of poor souls had looked me in the eyes before the flat line. Usually they had a look of fear or peace or sadness. This woman looked at me with pure hatred. In all my years, it was the first time I had ever seen that look. The dread came back. We couldn't save her. Too old, too frail, too worn. I've seen that before. Our new young doctor was shaken. This was his first death. His first time hearing the ominous hum of a flatline. God love him. He tried to bring her back like a little boy trying to wake his parent up after a nap. He tried for so long. I touched his shoulder gently and met his eyes, and he understood. She had been gone for almost 15 minutes. We start unhooking her from the machines, writing her time of death. I think young doctor teared up at the process. I went through it like I was doing laundry. The process was almost second nature. Here comes the part I will never forget, as long as I live. Our patient had been dead for almost 15 minutes at this point. Suddenly she sits upright on that damn hospital bed, gripping the sheet with both her wrinkled, manicured hands. We immediately shot into action. This is something I've never seen before, but I guess nothing is impossible. Except that she had no pulse. She had no activity in her heart. She was colder than any corpse I had ever touched. She turned her head towards me slowly with the same hate I saw before. But beyond her unfocused, clouded blue eyes was something more like pure fear. Her paper-thin lips opened and she screamed, guttural and primal, a scream that made other nurses and one other doctor run to the room. Room 145. The scream ended, but my head was spinning. This woman is dead. She's dead. Could it be a reflex of the body? Escaping of gas? No. I would have seen this before, right? Am I dreaming? I must be. Her eyes rolled in the sockets. We were frozen in fear. I think I squeezed the arm of a nearby nurse, or maybe she was squeezing me. From the paper-thin lips of the woman in the floral nightgown came 9 words that none of us will ever forget. In a voice too deep and too dark to be human, she yelled to the top of her lungs, "I've been to hell, and I don't like it!" Then she laid back down. No pulse, no activity, just like before. Eyes open and still rolling. It took 3 nurses, including me, to pry her manicured hands from the bedsheet. All I can say is, this story is true. She was dead. Sometimes out of my peripheral vision, I still see an old woman in a floral nightgown, mouth opened impossibly wide, eyes rolling from side to side, and I pray. I pray. I have few, but this is probably the scariest and brings me to tears. So I lived in my aunt's house after she moved out, and we had a lot of ghost activity for years. My closet door would open fully and I would feel someone starting at me. There would be baby sounds, caused by hangers flying through the house. Whatever it was connected to my cousin at one point, but only I could see it. Well, a few years later, we moved to the country. I get into spirituality, and I'm really connected with nature at this point. Well, aside from the ghost or whatever TF that was years prior, I keep feeling like I'm being watched, and even see shadows sometimes. Well, one night, I'm going to sleep late after watching TV on the couch. I go to my room, and I'm just starting at the window. All of a sudden, I turn to my door, which has a night light shining down by the crack at the bottom. I hear the footstep make a creak. I look down and 2 feet walk in front of my door and slowly turn to where the feet are facing me. I just freeze. I knew my dad had already gone to sleep, and I hear him snoring. I feel this dark-ass energy. At this point, I'm trying not to have tears roll down my face, and I call my ex. I keep him on the phone. I later fall asleep. This wasn't the end, though. I come back from my friend's house, and they leave to go get some stuff so we can go to the lake. I'm in the bathroom. All of a sudden, I hear a growl. My dogs are outside asleep on the other side of the house, so they am like, WTF. Not only do I hear a growl, I hear something whisper. Then I hear scratch marks. So I open the door, and I hear nothing. So I go back to the bathroom and close the door. I hear it again, but louder. I try to take a video, and nothing on it comes up, but it keeps whispering into my ear and growling. At this point, I'm scared. So I call my friends, and I'm like, can y'all hear that? And they're like, no. I tell them to get here now. They get here, and I run so fast out of the house. I'm extremely connected to anything with witchcraft or spiritual. At the time, I wasn't even practicing, or even knew how. I had crystals, and I guess I had some old spell works, and I was trying to figure out my family history. I had crows follow me everywhere, too. I just thought maybe I was being looked over. Whatever was after me in my previous house, I feel that it followed me to the new house. I ended up cleansing and didn't have any activity for a while. Here's where I messed up. Like I said, I lived in the very old country in the woods. Well, I was with my family on the ATV, and we discovered a very old cemetery, dating back to the early 1800. I see this grave with a mom and her 3 kids. All died at birth or within a year, from influenza as shown on the grave. Well, I go to clean it off. Mind you, the grass is cut, because it's beside a church that's not used often, but kept up. As I'm cleaning off the grave, I can't help but feel for the mother, so I'm talking and saying I'm sorry, and I'm reminding her, hey, I'm just cleaning off their graves. All of a sudden, I have blood pouring down my leg. I have huge scratch marks running down my leg. I whisper, sorry, and I run to my dad and tell him. He doesn't really believe in this stuff, but he looked scared. We immediately left. I never had a problem or even saw her or her kids in ghost form. Till this day, I'm scared to open up to my spiritual or witch side. These encounters involved my siblings from time to time, but for some reason I was always the one who saw or had these things happen to me. Scares the absolute shit out of me.